If you're trying to learn a different language, one big question is how do I immerse myself into language if I don't know any of it? So, say you're starting from scratch, maybe you're an English person learning Spanish or Italian or any language, and you're thinking, I don't know a word. I might know hello, goodbye. I might have just downloaded Duolingo and I don't know what to say at all. So, if you want to immerse yourself into a different language, that is often considered the best way to learn it because it essentially is if you move to Spain, you're going to absorb Spanish and that will help you learn it. But how do you do that if you don't understand a word? In this video, I'm going to cover a few things. So there's 3 points I want to cover based on my 13 years learning Spanish and Italian and the psychology behind how we learn languages most effectively. So first of all, there's a difference between active listening and passive listening or learning essentially. Actively learning or listening to a language is when you sit down and you're thinking, right, okay, what's the past tense of this? What does this mean? Okay, cool. You're actively in the zone trying to absorb the content and listening to it. You're putting effort into it. Then passive learning essentially is so you're in a car and you're daydreaming, you're driving along or you're commuting, your mind's wandering, then the radio is on in your target language, or there's a podcast in Spanish. You don't understand a single word of what's going on. Or maybe you're in a busy town centre in Italy, you're living in Italy now, and you're trying to understand what's going on, but you're just looking at the shops and services, you're just looking at different people, you're sort of relaxing, but you can still hear the language going into your ears. And your mind, whether you like it or not, is trying to work out what this means. Because for your body to survive from like instinctively, your brain wants to know what's going on. So it's in its best interest to understand if there's danger or anything by understanding what's happening. That's why humans like gossip. Oh, is there any updates on this? You would rather know what's happening than not. So my point is, while many people focus on active learning, aka putting effort to understand or practice a language, if you can passively learn it as well, that's essentially how to immerse yourself into a language even when you don't understand it. That's the first point because you might be an example of this. Another example of this is if you're watching TV shows and content and you're watching what's happening, but it's in Spanish and you're a native English speaker, you won't understand what's going on. But put the subtitles on in English, so you can still hear what's happening in Spanish, you can still hear everything in a native language, but then you're watching it, it has to be something that you actually enjoy, first of all. But then what's happening is your brain is working out, okay, that woman has just passed that man a bottle of water, and I heard the word agua, which means water in Spanish. And it's like, oh, okay, that makes sense now. And you don't have to be consciously taking note of that. You just think, okay, that's what's going on. And when you live in a different country, maybe you're going to a supermarket, you get to the checkout, and the woman says, bolsa, to the person next to you and hands them a bag. You're like, oh, okay, that must be the word for bolsa. But you're not thinking, oh, I'm now learning the word for bag in Spanish. You're just noticing it. And that happens in your brain. So next time you come and you want to say the word for that, you're thinking, I think I know what it is because your brain already recognizes it. And that is passively listening and passively absorbing a language. So that is one way to immerse yourself in a language without even knowing the words, just by exposing yourself to it in natural ways. But obviously, it depends if you're living in the place where the language is spoken, if you're living in that country. If not, it can be harder. Like if I'm based in Manchester now and I'm not living in Spain, it's more difficult. So alternative ways of doing it is having a podcast on, maybe on Spotify or YouTube in your target language. So it might be for me, if I'm practicing Spanish or trying to learn Spanish, put it on 100% in Spanish. Don't have it where you're sort of listening to an English speaker explaining the concepts of Spanish because that defeats the point. That would be more actively listening because you're thinking, okay, I'm listening to what this teacher is saying now, as well as the content itself. The point is, you don't have to put effort into it. You're just letting your ears and your mind get used to the flow, accent, patterns of the language. And that is how you do it, basically. But then the question is, how do you integrate this into your life? Where you can have it on your commute, maybe you're getting a bus or the train or you're driving. If you just have it on playing in the background, that is enough. You don't have to be focusing on it. You can be thinking about your meeting or your day at work. But you're still hearing those sounds of the language in your head. And what will happen is, the more you do that, you'll find that if you're just doing your teeth or in the shower or doing something cleaning around the house, you'll have these words pop up in your head. And that means your brain is a bit obsessed with understanding the patterns behind it. And that's how it learns outside of you actively trying to learn it. It's pattern recognition in your mind happening at the same time as you're doing other stuff. And that's really good. And that is a sign that you're exposing yourself to the language enough to be immersed into it. And that's the first bit. So yeah, watch TV shows and content in language that you're watching because that is the closest way to get to being fully immersed into language, you're essentially a third person watching it. And that's why you might hear so many people say, oh, I learned English from watching YouTube, or I learned this language from watching content. And it is true. And it's more true than you think. It's hard to track your progress when you're watching content online and you don't feel like you're learning it because you're not sat down with a pen and paper writing down grammar. So it's a bit of a different way of doing it. But if you think about it, that's how babies learn their native language. They watch their parents and people around them speaking and passing them across different things. They're constantly like mesmerized. They're thinking, oh, what's going on here? They're keen to learn whether they like it or not. That's why people say that if you're a baby or small child, it's easier to learn language than when you're an adult. And it's not because of any special capabilities. Obviously, their brain is more absorbent of new information, but it's because of the method that they use. They use exposure and they don't understand every word. But when their parents say, oh, drink or water or food, and then they get a sandwich or something, whatever babies eat, then they now think, okay, I say that word and I get that. Okay, thirsty. So then, oh, there we go, get a drink. There we go. So it doesn't have to be perfect grammar. And then the final point is understand or have the mentality that you know that there'll be loads of words that you don't know. You might know one word out of 50, for example, if you're trying to learn a different language and you're right at the start. Some words, for example, in Spanish or Italian, will be similar to English. And that's fine because it helps you get a bit closer and you're like, okay, I get the context now. They might have said this word or something and it sounds very similar to English or it's the same word. Like computer is basically the same word in both languages. But then there'll be other words that you don't know and you might think that you're not learning it because you don't know every single word or you don't know most of them. But that's fine because over time, as you expose yourself more to it, your brain will have more time to understand the patterns. And that's essentially how repeat exposure, even passive exposure, over time gets you closer to learning a language than not doing that at all. And it's the best way that resembles you living and breathing the language in a different country, but without having to leave your country. And you can just do that as part of your routine. If you're driving to the gym or you're in a gym between sets, maybe you normally listen to music, try and replace it with your target language or like a podcast or something, or street interviews in Spanish. Street interviews I think are really good because that's the colloquial, informal way that people speak, as opposed to in a classroom that you're taught, and that's more formal basically. So that's my recommendation based on my 13 years of experience learning Spanish and Italian. Understand that don't beat yourself up if you can't see progress straight away because it takes a few months to actually get used to it. And if you can, try and practice language as early as you can. Now, I'll put a link below in the description, but I've made a platform that helps you practice your target language with AI, just using personas. There's no judgment and it's 24/7, do it whenever you want. So yeah, let me know what you think about that. But in the meantime, good luck and see you later.